Thank you. Good afternoon, Moderator and Commissioners. Let me begin by thanking my fellow trustees and all of our staff for their hard work and dedicated support that they provide for congregations and presbyteries. Special thanks are due to the trustees and advisory members listed in Section 9 of the report as retiring at this General Assembly, and I see some of them here today. All of them contributed greatly to the operation of our committees. I also wish to thank the staff of the Law Department and Stewardship and Finance, with whom we work very closely. Accompanying me today are the Reverend Scott Rennie, our Vice Chair, and members of the senior staff team, including Brian Waller, our Chief Executive. Scott and I will form a double act, as we did at last year's Assembly, and I will defer to Scott on certain topics, including questions about presbytery planning. Was that a joke? Before I highlight aspects of the formal report, I'll provide some background to the work of the General Trustees within the Church of Scotland for those less familiar with our role. The General Trustees of the Church of Scotland is a body that was incorporated by Act of Parliament in 1921, so we beat COSIT. The trustees are answerable to the General Assembly, but as a separate registered Scottish charity, we have the duties, responsibilities and liabilities of charity trustees, and that includes operating the restricted funds that we are responsible for in line with our governing regulations. The trustees' mission statement is: the General Trustees support congregations and presbyteries in maintaining and developing appropriate, flexible, robust and sustainable facilities capable of supporting local mission and worship. The staff use their expertise to provide advice and practical support to congregations so that they can use their buildings and glebes effectively and safely. Areas of support include church law, planning and other legislation, conservation, buildings and land surveying and valuation, health and safety, including fire, hygiene and environmental matters, architecture, heritage and listings, and construction management. This support has been further enhanced by the appointment of presbytery buildings officers. So I now turn to the content of the report of the General Trustees. It covers a range of topics, several of which are highlighted in the deliverance itself. My comments follow the order in which they appear in the report. Section 1 refers to the annual report and financial statements for 2023. This has been audited and signed and can be found on the church website. Section 3 covers governance initiatives, including an external review about the operation of our board and our committee structure, and the ongoing review of the trustees' investment policy, and that is further referred to in section 5541. I consider section 4 to be our report card, as it describes progress and developments arising from deliverances relating to the trustees from last year's Assembly. This list is kept under continuous review and is on the agenda for each board meeting. For several of these topics, cross-references have been provided to further details that appear in later sections of the report. Section 5 comprises reports from our committees. The Fabric Committee is anticipating increased activity as the approval of presbytery plans means that most congregations and presbyteries know which buildings would now benefit from professional advice and financial assistance. Working groups dealing with manses and health and safety report to the Fabric Committee. The report of the Glebes Committee highlights the involvement of the trustees, for example, in the provision of affordable housing on the Isle of Barra. The report of the Presbytery Support and Buildings Committee provides details of its activities and projects, most of which are arising out of presbytery planning. It was also involved in the completion of the Bertha Park initiative. The recruitment and future funding of presbytery buildings officers is dealt with in section 7.3 that I'll refer to shortly. The Audit and Assurance Committee, in conjunction with our Nominations Committee, is responsible for the implementation of the recommendations of the External Governance Review. The report of the Finance and Resources Committee refers to energy procurement. As indicated at last year's Assembly, the average cost of both gas and electricity roughly doubled when the supply contracts were renewed. The increases partly reflect the low rates enjoyed previously and partly the impact of the increase in global energy costs in recent times. Staff have also had to deal with the highly regrettable billing problems caused by the systems failings of the previous gas supplier. We can only apologise to congregations and treasurers who were affected. That is covered in more detail in section 5525. Crossreach is making progress with the rebuilding of Gabberston House, and the first tranche of loan finance from the trustees is now being provided. That is in section 5543. Section 6 describes matters relating to manses in considerable detail, and I would encourage you to read this in full. The two main topics are the condition of manses in 6.2 and manse provision for ministers in 6.3. We very much regret to be reiterating much of what was reported last year about the condition of manses and the lack of information forthcoming about their condition. Staff therefore undertook 2 actions in support of our manse working group in order to proactively improve the information to hand. A survey was issued to ministers as described in 626, and the response rate was an encouraging 50%. Although further analysis is required, an initial review indicates that the main issues facing ministers are the cost of heating, dampness, maintenance not being carried out, and there not being enough flexibility in the manse standard, and also gardens being too large to maintain. Also, as stated in 627, they trawled through an online database for energy performance certificates and found data there for 75% of the manses. Presbyteries had been instructed to provide this information, and the missing ones are now being urgently sought. Regarding the provision of manses to ministers, the investigation and discussions held led to the outcome reported in section 6361, namely that the current model of manse provision should be retained as the default position unless or until HMRC changes the taxation rules. Section 7 deals with financial resources. Firstly, the Consolidated Fabric Fund. In 2023, the trustees were asked to review the rules relating to disbursements from the Consolidated Fabric Fund. It's a restricted fund, and the solicitor set out the limitations that restrict what the trustees are allowed to do with it, and our report explained what flexibility was already permitted. However, the current rules about the revenue accounts are complicated and limiting, and so, as detailed in section 7141, it is proposed that from the 1st of June 2024, congregations will be able to draw down those revenue account monies in full for any purpose aligned with the 5 marks of mission. That will continue to include meeting fabric costs, utility bills, and insurance premiums. The operation of the capital accounts in that fund has to be more tightly controlled. Using non-legal terminology, fabric monies can only be applied to non-fabric purposes if the congregation's future fabric needs are already well catered for. Similar rules already exist to permit transfers from the fabric fund to the stipend fund, though they are rarely used. This proposal will provide greater flexibility by allowing disbursements to be made for other purposes aligned with the 5 marks of mission, albeit only if future fabric costs have been conservatively allowed for. As a result of making these changes, the trustees have not taken forward proposals about changing the application of the levy to the disposal proceeds of buildings. That is mentioned in 7.4. We have been looking at the fund charges, the charges made on the restricted funds. The Trustees' report to the 2023 Assembly showed the estimated cost of operating each of the Trustees' restricted funds and compared that with the very limited support costs that the Trustees' General Fund currently charges each of those funds. As described in 7.2, it is simply not sustainable for the General Fund to continue to subsidise all these restricted funds to that extent, and the Trustees will work with Stewardship and Finance to determine a more appropriate level of support costs that can be applied to the funds from the 1st of January 2025. I turn now to Presbytery Buildings officers. When the PBOs were first introduced, the Trustees agreed to fund 50% of their employment costs for a 3-year trial period, with presbyteries paying the other 50%. The Trustees, and indeed presbyteries, believe their appointment has been a great success and their contracts are now on a permanent basis. Rather than just extending this 50-50 approach to funding, an alternative model is being proposed, under which the Trustees will pay 100% of the cost of employing the PBOs from the start of 2025, so long as the General Fund is able to receive a more realistic level of support costs, as I just outlined. Section 8 deals with legislation, and Section 8.1 introduces the consolidating legislation that can be found in the supplementary report that I will refer to shortly. Section 8.2 shows that with the input of the Solicitor and the Procurator, significant progress has been made on interpreting the registration requirements under the Land Reform Scotland Act 2006, which were seen to be extremely onerous. As stated in 825, congregational buildings vested in the General Trustees do not need to be registered. The Law Department has provided guidance for congregations about the registration requirements for those buildings that are held in the name of local congregational trustees. There is a supplementary report to the General Trustees this year, and this contains a deliverance seeking Assembly approval of the Church of Scotland General Trustees Properties, Funds and Endowments Act 2024. This Act consolidates much of the accumulated legislation applicable to the Trustees, and guidance will be issued in due course. The first page indicates that in addition to consolidating existing legislation, the opportunity has been taken to make some changes. Finally, the General Trustees acknowledge yesterday's decision about Presbytery Mission Planning Review process and stand ready to undertake not just their new formal quinquennial role, but also to provide assistance to presbyteries with their annual reviews. The Trustees will, of course, continue with their responsibilities for the satisfactory maintenance of buildings in partnership with presbyteries and congregations. Moderator, I have much pleasure in presenting the report and the supplementary report of the General Trustees of the Church of Scotland to the General Assembly, and I would ask the Principal Clerk to move these two deliverances.
I so move.
Seconded. Convener, for the sake of those folks online, could you introduce yourself, please? I didn't want to stop you mid-flow.
Thank you so much. Alan Kennedy, the Chair of the General Trustees, but I'm not a Commissioner.
Right, thank you.
I'm numberless.
All right, we've got several questions, and just a reminder, could you please state your question very early on and keep any comment to the question as brief as is possible. I'm going to hear first of all from Ben Thorpe and then Brian Kerr.
Ben Thorpe, number 181. As someone who's benefited greatly from the installation of an EV charger at my manse, I was glad to hear in section 4.2 of the report that the General Trustees are working with suppliers and congregations to make this possible in more places. I would like to ask, though, whether or not the committee have considered entering into similar negotiations with installers of solar panels. Historic Scotland While they don't have quite as many ancient buildings as we do, manage over 300 historic sites and have been installing solar panels on many of them, including the castle just up the hill, making considerable savings that are both environmental and financial. It would seem to me that many of our churches, and indeed manses, have aspects suitable for the installation of panels, and that a suitable deal with a recognised installer could provide a boost to our net zero efforts and help to reduce some of our costs. Thank you.
Scott?
Moderator, Scott Rennie, 462 Vice Chair. Thanks very much for the question, Mr Thorpe. There are actually quite a number of churches beginning to install solar panels and looking into it. And we have been in conversations this year with Historic Environment Scotland about the possibility of rolling that out. Sometimes it's difficult on historic buildings, but often the barrier isn't so much Historic Environment Scotland, but sometimes, let's say, the welcome to solar panels on historic buildings can vary from local authority to local authority. So we're trying to figure that all out. We haven't looked into doing a deal with a company, but it's certainly something we'd be happy to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Kerr and then Donald McEwen.
Moderator, thank you. Kerr 227. It's in relation to Presbytery Buildings Officers at section 7.3. I can't say too much about how good ours is because she will be insufferable later on, but she really has transformed the way that we look after buildings in our presbytery. Have the trustees given thought to, now that they will be fully funded by the GTs and the Central Fabric Fund, whether the partnership in terms of supporting PBOs, even kind of almost line managing between the GTs and Presbytery, will continue, or will that burden fall more to the General Trustees than to Presbytery in the future?
Thank you for that question. Catherine Isherwood, who is here, is the line manager of the Presbytery Buildings Officers. But let me be as clear as possible. The intention is that even though the funding of the PBOs will be moving to 100% General Trustees, the liaison with presbyteries and the relationship with presbyteries will be unaltered. Thank you.
Thank you. Donald McEwen and then Valerie Ott. That's you.
Donald McEwen, 274. In the Presbytery of Fife, I convene a committee called the Historic Buildings Support Group. And the purpose of that group is to help congregations or community groups, particularly in the area of disposal of historic church buildings, a number of which will be disposed of in the Presbytery of Fife's mission plan. And when we're visiting congregations or community groups, a typical question from them is, if we want to take on this historic building, how long could we have in a sort of period of exclusivity with the General Trustees in order to explore options, put together business plans, get together partnerships with the community? And I don't know how to answer that. And so I'm wondering, here's the question: can the General Trustees give a general rule of thumb that in the disposal of historic church buildings, how long a period of exclusivity there can be with a potential community group that wishes to take it on?
Moderator, Rennie, 462. Can I thank Dr. McEwen for his question? So that it's quite common for communities to try and look into that. So we tend to have an exclusive period of something like 6 to 12 months. It varies. But we have an officer, Rob Lee, who deals with anyone who has a community that's interested in that regard, and I would encourage anybody in that position to get in touch with Rob. The trustees just recently passed a new protocol to try and help us have I suppose, a consistent approach of how we deal with it, because there are so many of these requests. In our experience, when a community learns about a church building going to be sold or disposed of, we tend to allow that 6 to 12 months, because generally our experience is that if a community is going to find within itself a group of people who are going to be able to carry it through, it tends to be in that 6 to 9 months period. But obviously there's flexibility.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now looking for Valerie Ott, and that'll be followed by Doug Gay.
Ott 102. It was really a very similar question. It was about community takeover of redundant church buildings. Do we have to sell them to them? Are we allowed to give them away to them? Yeah.
The answer is, Rennie, 462. Generally, I'm afraid you can't give them away. So the General Trustees for the Church of Scotland has a fiduciary duty to ensure that we protect the resources of the Church of Scotland as the owner of these buildings. Now, that's not to say we don't work with congregations where another group might be coming and interested, but we can't give them away. We have a policy about value, but no, you can't give them away, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Doug Gay. In the gallery. That's it.
Doug Gay, 185. In the light of the remarks in the Assembly Trustees report about a direction of travel towards decentralisation within the Church, how would the trustees respond to concerns, particularly in the context of mission planning, that there has been too heavy a hand and too centralised a hand exercised in relation to the closure of church buildings, and that more of these decisions should be left with presbyteries and local churches?
Moderator Rennie, 462. Obviously, as a body of General Trustees, we entirely respect and will honour yesterday's decision vis-à-vis the overture. In general, this is not really a matter of legislation. It's a matter of relationship, and it's about partnership. So, for example, the majority of presbytery plans with regard to buildings were passed came through the GTs and PIMPIG indeed, without any change. It was a minority of plans where we went back. We've always tried to be a critical friend to presbyteries in the sense we ask questions, and, you know, but at the end of the day, these plans are presbytery plans. And, you know, so we respect that. I suppose the only rejoinder that I would say to Doug, and I think that's the way we try to work. And generally we work with presbyteries and we have no difficulty at all. But it all comes down to the relationship we have. The difficulty, well, it's not a difficulty of the system. The reality of the system that we inhabit is that sometimes decisions about buildings at a local or regional level can have implications for the national. And by that, I mean, the General Trustees' money resources, it's not ours as the General Trustees. It's the Church's money. It's our big pooled pot of money to help each other. And it means that we can help churches do things that perhaps otherwise couldn't afford to do things. And that's a great thing. But likewise, if, for example, you have a presbytery which, I don't know, says a building is an A, and then 2 years into a presbytery plan, that presbytery comes back and says, oh, by the way, the congregation are gone, and here's the keys back, and by the way, you've got to pay for the insurance. The problem for us as trustees, for everybody, is a presbytery makes those decisions, but actually, we are the people who have, not the General Trustees, on your behalf, we bear that burden. Or, for example, if there are churches, if a presbytery any presbytery, doesn't take care to make sure that churches are having something that seems boring, an electrical inspection certificate. But a church goes up on fire, and the insurers say, well, do you have evidence that you had electrical inspection? We say, oh, well, actually, no, because we didn't adhere to the General Assembly's own regulations. That doesn't just affect the congregation whose building has gone up on fire. That affects every single congregation who's part of the insurance scheme, because that means the following year, everybody's premium is going to go up. So we live in this organism of shared responsibility and shared decision-making. But I can say to Doug, we have no desire to micromanage buildings and presbyteries. Our main concern is to make sure that General Assembly legislation, something that we all decide and we all agree, as per the condition of buildings and regulations of buildings, are adhered to, simply so that we have buildings that are safe, that are good, that are warm, that are hospitable, and that are fit for mission. And at the end of the day, whatever differences of opinion there might be, or whatever changes in legislation, it's partnership that will make the difference.
Thank you. Andrew Sarrell, David Locke, and then Fraser Edwards. And then I think we will move to receiving report, noting that you can raise questions as we go through, section by section. Andrew.
Sarrell, 236. The General Trustees talk of ministers being such busy people that it's an advantage to be relieved of the burdens associated with property ownership. I wonder, if I may, if the convener lives in his own home and would like to be relieved of the burden of doing so. Growing up, I sensed a call to serve God, but as I entered into my 40s, one of my internal arguments I had with myself was about not wanting to uproot from the home that I lived in and be obliged to move into a manse. Consequently, I trained as a reader and served as an attached reader and became an OLM almost as soon as that became allowed.
Andrew, could you give us a note of your question first and then a brief comment to it?
I thought asking the convener whether he wanted to live in a manse. Does he think that many people, busy people in the Assembly and in our congregations, would also like to be relieved of the burden of living in their own homes? My rationale from that is that I, as an OLM and a former presbytery clerk, I'm quite happy not to be relieved of so-called burden of having to live in a manse. I'm quite happy to live in my own home, and I'm sure many ministers would wish to do so if they could.
Because we're verging into comment here. Chair.
A brief response to answer the specific question. I'm not a minister, so the question doesn't arise. The section in our report that refers to this, I tried to emphasise this earlier. We're talking about the default position. And that if the default position, which is ministers in a manse, were to change, there could be significant issues with HMRC which would affect the tax position of the majority of ministers who do live in manses. The report also goes into, in some detail, some of the circumstances in which it is appropriate for a minister to live in his or her own manse. And that may become a wee bit more flexible as time develops. But at the moment, what we're having to focus on in this is the default position, and unless or until there's a change in tax law, that is our proposal.
Thank you. David Locke, then Fraser Edwards. You got it. Right, your light's not on yet, as you.
Moderator David Locke, 363. First, a confession. For the first time, I had vowed never to speak at the Assembly, and I failed. The question is about 4.12, about when a property, a church is sold or a congregation is disbanded, half of the monies will go to presbytery. And that worried me when I read it, because I could think of an island in Orkney where I am. How will it get mission? if the money's going somewhere else in a giant presbytery? Is there any provision to ensure that some of the money goes to the mission in the place where the congregation is being disbanded?
Chair.
This was arising out of the deliverance at the 2023 Assembly. And what we arranged at that time was that in the event of dissolutions only, in the event of a dissolution, half of the proceeds would go to the Central Fabric Fund and half would go within the Central Fabric Fund but be ring-fenced for that particular congregation, presbytery. None of the money would actually go to presbytery. Now, had we developed further the notion of how we would apply the levy, we might have been talking about what you're referring to. But because we have freed up monies within the Consolidated Fabric Fund, we have not gone down the route of changing the levy. So monies going to presbytery, it does not arise.
Thank you. Fraser Edwards, then we're going to move to section 1, and other questions can come up as we go through section by section. So, Fraser.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I can't see you for
Sorry,
that.
Edwards, number 64. Question relates to section 5.2 on glebes. Trustees encourage all congregations who have glebes to engage with the trustees to generate income for the congregation by lease or sale. And we had an approach to buy part of our glebe in March 2022. We would have been delighted to go ahead with, and hasn't gone anywhere since. So I suppose I really wondered, do the General Trustees have capacity for all the property sales and land sales that we might be trying to do at the moment?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, we're aware of the fact that in recent times there has been a stop on some of the sale of glebes. However, personnel issues and volume of work was what was behind that. We believe that situation is now, if not fully resolved, has significantly improved, and will be taking forward the sale of glebes. Overall, resourcing within both the General Trustees and the Law Department in respect of the sale of glebes and other properties is an issue that we are continually monitoring, and will be liaising further with the Law Department and putting together, hopefully, a protocol with presbyteries to smooth the process of sales.
Right, thank you. We move then to section 1, receive the report. And online, thank you. Section 2. Now, I've got a notice of a question. Stella Campbell, and I'm not sure if this is on this particular section or a later one, so maybe you... Section 6, that's fine. Thank you. Somebody can remind me when we get to section 6. Section 2. And online, thank you. Section 3. And I've got notice of a new section in the name of Reverend Dr. Andrew Gardner.
Thank you, Moderator. Andrew Gardner, 302. Moderator, when I read section...
A wee second.
Okay, could I read it out?
Yeah.
Yes, please, sorry.
It helps you on the timing thing, Andrew, and also then to say there is an amendment to this as well in the name of Scott Rennie. So the first bit is that this is Andrew Gardner's new motion, and it reads as follows. Remind Kirk Sessions of their existing obligations under church law to send Manse condition schedules to presbyteries by the 31st of May in each year, and instruct the General Trustees to report back to the General Assembly in 2025 on the extent to which this is being done. Thank you.
Thank you. Moderator, when I read section 3 of the deliverances from the General Trustees, I have to say I was dismayed. I've been an ordained minister nearly 30 years. And in the early years of my ministry, I was a member of the property committee of the Old Hamilton Presbytery. One of the things that we were dealing with on our agenda then were standards for manses. I've been at previous General Assemblies where there's been a list of standards for manses. To read that the presbyteries had a poor response in requests for manse condition schedules is shocking. Does it mean that Kirk Sessions are not taking this seriously? Moderator, I know of colleagues where their manses are cold. I know of colleagues whose mental health has diminished because of the condition of their manse. Cold kitchens, leaky roofs, mouldy walls. We are in danger of there being no change, no improvement, no upgrade in the overall condition of manses if Kirk Sessions ignore submitting manse condition schedules. We are in a position where history might repeat itself. I'm not promising to stand here in 30 years' time making the same comment. I hope that the General Assembly will support this new number 4, and implore Kirk Sessions to show that they care for their minister and submit these manse condition schedules. Take the issue seriously. I hear that with such a shaky start, I fear that with a shaky start, we will see no improvement. Thank you, Moderator.
Right, thank you, Andrew. Is that seconded? Thank you. I've got notice of amendment from the Vice Chair, Scott Rennie, and I'm minded to hear the amendment first, and then we can decide what we're then doing with it before we put it to Assembly. Scott, do you wish to...
If I read it out, Moderator, if that's all right, and then that helps Scott. So this is an amendment in the name of Scott Rennie, and it's to amend Andrew Gardner's new section 4 by inserting after manse condition schedules the following words: and property registers for churches and halls. And then to insert after each year, so it's 31st of May each year, the words and remind presbyteries to send the return sheet to the General Trustees by 31st of August in each year.
Scott.
Richard Rennie, 462. First of all, to say we are entirely supportive of Andrew's motion. And in fact, we wanted to add to it in terms of not only manse condition schedules, but also property registers for churches and halls, and also to remind presbyteries that it's their duty. It's not just a case of if a congregation fails. If a congregation fails to submit what it should submit, it's then the presbytery's duty to chase that up. It's been COVID and a lot of things have gone by the way, but I want to assure the Assembly that from next year we will report just how, to the extent to which presbyteries fulfil their duties to get the kind of information from congregations that the petitioner asks for.
Thank you.
Would you be willing to accept that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Moderator.
Right, so I've got notice of a comment by Neil Glover, and I wonder if Neil still wishes to make the comment, knowing that the mover of a new section is happy to accept the amendment. Neil.
Thank you, Moderator. Yesterday, we made a seismic decision in terms of the Presbytery Mission Planning Act, giving much more freedom to presbyteries. This deliverance here in the amended version brings up our side of the deal, which is within presbyteries, we now have to make sure that we look after our properties and enable the trustees to fulfill their job. I've been really encouraged over the past year the way the trustees have engaged with our mission planning, trusting us in our presbytery to deal with questions of mission. But they've made one ask: please make sure you look after your properties and do the right documentation on it. This is what this enables, and I thoroughly commend this amendment to the deliverance.
Are you wishing to speak on this section?
Section 4, yeah.
The new section 4 or the 4 in print?
Just the 4.
The 4 in print? Yes. Right, we'll come to it in a wee minute or two. We're not quite there yet. It's there. Neil, I must confess I was tied up with what was going to happen. I missed part of your comment, but is anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment to the new section in Andrew Gardner's name? If not, we'll then move to see whether the Assembly will accept the amendment to Andrew Gardner's motion. Thereafter, if you do, they will then put that to the Assembly. Okay. So are you accepting then the amendment to Andrew Gardner's section and online? Okay, and then we then put the amended new section to the General Assembly. And online. We now move to section 4 in the print, and I'll deal with questions. First of all, so I've got Charlene Condeso and Diane McCabe.
Charlene Condeso, 222. The question relates to 6.3.2.3, the first bullet point. The General Trustees talk of a minister being one of us simply by living in a manse provided within the parish. But notwithstanding the fact that for many years there have been a number of manses which have been out with the parish boundaries anyway, and given the fact that now many parishes are large and will be larger in the future, covering several communities, will the minister somewhat be less than one of us by living in only one of these communities?
Chair.
Thank you. I'm advised that the straightforward answer is no. He will be no less a minister. Thank you.
Okay, Diane McCabe.
Diane McCabe, 256. The General Trustees have stated the default position of HMRC. Any changes in this position would presumably involve lengthy discussions with HMRC. Could the convener give us more details of the meetings? How many meetings were held? How involved were the discussions? Who represented the HMRC and at what level? I'm not a minister. I'm saying this as an elder, and I'm asking out of pastoral concerns for our ministers. There's no one size fits all for ministers, and there's a wide variance in family circumstances and stage in life of our ministers. A manse isn't just a perk of the job, it's a home for the minister and for their family, a home that they've got very little influence over. A fact that I know very well because my minister and their family have had to be moved out of the manse quickly due to problems with the building, and we are now in a protracted situation as we await permission for a new manse. But for some ministers, they'll feel that they would prefer to live in a home which they own, particularly if they're planning ahead to retirement. I had a company car for many years, and other people who use their own car for business, that's all taken into account in remuneration packages and in tax. I appreciate that manses are different, but we really need more information to help people. Thank you.
Right, Chair.
Thank you for opening up that issue for us. Can I comment on something you said halfway through? It goes back to what we were discussing earlier, which is some of what you refer to is a function of the quality of the manses and their maintenance. Returning to your particular point, I am informed that our tax advisors have been in touch with HMRC on the issue, but in my opinion, there's a limit to how much you can push without there being a risk to the whole scheme, which would be detrimental to ministers. The other point to make is that the tax position is not specific to the Church of Scotland. It applies to many denominations. And I'm told that the majority of denominations have the same approach as the Church of Scotland for that very reason. If it were to change, the whole package of remuneration for ministers would probably have to change with it. And that, thank goodness, is not a responsibility of the General Trustees. But thank you for your question.
Right, I've noticed a comment from Alison Meikle.
Moderator Alison Meikle, number 230. Following what we've heard in previous years and just now about HMRC, we must support our ministers. We need to value them and consider seriously the conditions some of our ministers are living in. Moderator, I would like to move that we remove section 4, as in the print, of the deliverance. There is little detail in the report on mixed man's provision, and this topic demands more detail and thought. HMRC needs to be engaged in a series of serious negotiations. We've given in too easily in the past, accepting the default position that there are tax implications. We've just heard that the majority of other denominations are in the same position as us. But there are other denominations where there is this mixed option, shall we say. Moderator, given the poor condition of many manses, we must move forward this question forward as a matter of urgency and find a place of choice which should be the minimum in a modern church. Moderator, I would like to delete this section and ask the GTs to go back and engage with HMRC more seriously, engage with the many ministers who would like this option and involve them seriously in this process, and not simply present us with the benefits of man's provision. I have organised a seconder. Thank you, Moderator.
Sorry, I think there's been some confusion. There's no that would be a counter motion, Alison. And we haven't got that in the print. What we understood is that you were speaking against section 4 rather than moving it. What you've now kind of saying is a bit of a counter motion. So my question to you is, don't worry, I think the moderator might let us have a cup of tea in a minute, is if you want to move a motion and, actually to counter it with something else, if you want to do that, let us know and we'll have a cup of tea. Or you're just asking the Assembly to vote against this section.
So you can just simply call for a vote and it goes for an electronic vote for or against the motion. So
for against, you're arguing against. Yes, so you would like an electronic vote. Marvellous, right. We got there. Fantastic. And we'll get a cup of tea soon, honestly. Won't we?
All right, so that was a comment from somebody who has just been asking us that when we come to see whether we approve this section, that we come to have an electronic vote so people can vote for or against. But the Chair wants to say a few words.
I just thought I would respond to some of that. Elements of what you said refer back to the quality of manses rather than the means of providing them, and we wholly support that aspect. The question of manses for ministers and the legislation behind that has been gone into many times over the years, and last year at the 2023 Assembly, with the prodding of the Principal Clerk, we were asked to lead on reinvestigating it, and I recall some commissioners saying, we want to go right back to the outset to see where this formula came from originally, and that's what was done. And you may also recall that last year's Assembly, the then Procurator referred to the fact that she had produced a report on this very topic, and that was recirculated, and it was confirmed that the information backing her advice had not changed. Might be talking slightly out of turn. You mentioned some other denominations doing things differently. There is a suspicion that one or two denominations have gone down a different route, but without taking HMRC with them.
Chair, can you speak into the microphone? We're not quite picking up on
I'm very sorry. Some other denominations may have gone down a different route, as you say, but it is possible that HMRC has not been fully consulted and things may come back to bite them.
Right, so we're then putting section... Oh, sorry, Procurator.
Moderator, thank you. My predecessor as Procurator produced a detailed opinion on the tax implications in the event that payments would be made instead of provision of amounts. Now, those payments would be a benefit in kind and taxable. So from the point of view of what the implications might be of moving away from provision of a manse where there is an obligation to live in the manse, the financial consequences may be very significant. Now, I did not produce that opinion, it was my predecessor. I haven't read it in preparation for today, but what I would say is the implications of moving away from the present arrangement, provision of a manse, obligation to live there, may be financially very, very significant.
Jonathan, you just see your name and number, just for the record.
Moderator.
The only one that doesn't need to do, I don't need to choose a clerk and myself.
Moderator, I should know. Brodie, Procurator 535.
Sorry, a point of order from Brian Kerr.
Moderator, Kerr 227. I'm just a little bit confused about this, and I'm wondering if the clerk can tell us if this is voted against, then what happens to the whole discussion? Does it just end, fall, stop? I think actually what Alison was talking about was that kind of in previous speakers, further discussions need to happen. I'm just a wee bit uncertain if it's a vote for or against. What happens if Assembly vote against to this whole discussion? And it may well be a counter motion, is actually what Mrs. Meikle might be thinking. I don't know.
Happy moderator. Thank you, Mr. Kerr. As things stand at this precise moment, it's either for or against, and if the Assembly says against, it falls away. So I have asked Ms. Meikle if she would like to do a counter motion, and nothing's on the floor yet. Others may wish to. If you do, I think we might need a cup of tea. Not that I'm really, so I leave it to the Assembly.
Right, comments from Lynn Brady.
Brady 54. I'm an interim minister. I served in Shetland. Shetland's got a very big problem in housing. I would never have been able to buy property in Shetland. The manses are okay for people in the Central Belt, but if you're a national church, we have to provide housing. Yes, it's got to be good housing. I've lived in manses in Orkney where they came and glued the windows up in the winter to keep the rain from coming in. And I've lived in the most beautiful manse in Shetland. But I do think, please think about this. If you think about our young people today, they can't get on the housing market. So how on earth are ministers coming out of training going to be able to get a mortgage? So I really ask Alison to think not just about those who have money, but think about those who haven't got the money for a deposit for a mortgage. And think about that and the fact that we're a national church. And that's why we have manses, not just because we need big houses, but if we want the church to be a national church and people to serve in it, we have to provide houses throughout Scotland.
Thank you. I've now got an indication that Alison wishes to produce a counter motion. Therefore, rather than taking this to give time for it to be put into words, I'm suggesting we go for a break for 15 minutes, circulation break, and we reconvene at 4:05. Let's call the Assembly to order. It's amazing what a cup of tea does. As far as I'm aware now, the counter motion is being withdrawn on the assurance of conversations about the issues to take place so that the matters aren't lost. So we then move to 4 as in the print, because we need to watch our time, folks. So I put 4 in the print to the Assembly. And online? Right, fine. So we now have 3 new sections. First 2 in the name of Colin Rennick. I just check that it's not the same one twice. No, it's 2 different ones. So Colin, wherever you are. Oh. You're out of uniform, Colin. I didn't recognise you.
Okay, hang on. This is Colin's, yeah? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, moderator. This is a first new section in the name of Colin Rennick. It is as follows. Affirm the important place of the arts in worship and mission, their contribution to knowledge and culture. Recognise that our rich heritage results from many years of generous giving from forebears, congregations and benefactors. Seek to protect this vital part of Scotland's story for the future through consultation and collaboration with relevant bodies. Acknowledge that the arts are a source of religious knowledge and experience, and urge the General Trustees to take all reasonable steps to safeguard this potential resource for worship in the future. Sorry, guys.
Rennick 316, aka Presenter, first name The. And I'm wondering what the principal clerk put in her tea. But anyway, I hope will be self-explanatory. It does reflect a concern that I'm hearing from within the church and the wider community up and down Scotland. And I plan to say nothing else about this, and I'll speak more to the next one pertaining to organs. So I so move.
Did you give your number, Colin? Right, thank you. Seconder for Colin's motion? Some folks over there. Seconded, and I've got notice of a question. Yvonne Grant. That's no problem.
Moderator 327, Yvonne Grant. As a former member of CARTA, I have a worry that the older, heavier relics of our Christian faith may be left behind in the ethos of clearing our former beloved churches. And I would like to know what the committee thinks of what will happen to these most important relics that belong to the said congregations. Will they be left to ruin through the time and ages of the society to come? And this also goes to organs as well. We know that organs are a thing that brings music and joy to congregations, but they're also a great worry to the congregations, both past and present, for the upkeep of the keepsake of that cherished instrument. And these instruments, whether large or small, play an integral part of the church's history. I would ask the committee, therefore, if it would be possible to make some assurances that these relics, however large or small, be kept in safety in some place of importance. Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you for that comment, and thank you for the motion, and thank you for your service on CARTA. The General Trustees accept this motion, and in actual fact, the General Trustees now act as the successor body to CARTA, the Church Art and Architecture Committee, and our Sanctuary Development Manager joined us from CARTA, and frankly, she is a standard bearer for the ethos of CARTA within the General Trustees, and she is already well versed in dealing with these very matters. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Now, we've got a new section proposed. There has been questions. The committee is prepared to accept. I know a couple of people want to make comments. Is it absolutely necessary, your comment? Are you happy to let us just let the General Trustees accept this new section? Right, then I will put the new section then to the Assembly formally. Do you accept the new section in the name of Colin Rennick? And online? Thank you. And I then call Colin again for his second new section, which I believe the General Trustees are prepared to accept also.
Thank you. Thank you, Moderator. So the second new section of number 5 in Colin Rennick's name is urge the General Trustees in consultation with presbyteries to give urgent thought to how pipe organs in church buildings scheduled for closure might be widely publicised as available for relocation to churches and other appropriate locations continuing in use, and report on action taken to the General Assembly of 2025.
Thank you, Moderator. Rennick 316. And I realise that by splitting it into two, I have two 2-minute slots. But I'm not going to risk it.
No, you haven't, Mr. the Presenter.
I was going to say, if you resist this, the no hymn, the rest of the Assembly will be in a singable key. And set to Dr. Browning's favourite key of B miserable. You fed that one to me, Dr. Browning. Just to say that since 1998, 94 pipe organs have been scrapped within the Church of Scotland and 79 relocated within Scotland, England, throughout Europe and as far afield as Lebanon. And currently, it's reckoned 161 Church of Scotland buildings that are being made redundant do have pipe organs within them. Approximately 100 of these are classified by the Scottish Federation of Organists as being of great value, and they might well be redeployed in the future. It's said of the products in the centre aisle of Lidl, when it's gone, it's gone. The same, I fear, is true of many good pipe organs, still with much potential, still not cheaply, I grant, capable of giving service to the church in the future, but none is mass-produced, and the quality is much better. Moderator, I so move.
Thank you. Seconded. There are, of course, more than other supermarkets with centre aisles as well, just for fairness. We have one question. I think it's important we take questions, because questions are always in order. Callum Gubby.
Comment.
Oh, can we hold off?
Sure.
Because of the lack of time, and I need to be with the youth delegates fairly shortly, is it a necessary comment, or the fact that the General Trustees are prepared to accept?
Gubby, number 32, in the interest of time and being covered and it being accepted, I will withdraw the comment for you.
Thank you very much, sir. Chair.
One very quick response to this. The GTs, as I've said, accept this motion. The Sanctuary Development Manager also advises on organ disposals. Some, of course, are kept by the new owners, and there are a number of other denominations taking over Church of Scotland buildings who will therefore look after such organs. I heard just today about a very, very old French organ which had been on the mainland and then transferred up to Shetland, which is probably now looking for another new home.
All right, we have a new section. Yeah, we're going to put that to Assembly. Yeah. Unless I'm totally mixed up. Right, so we have a new section that Colin proposed. The convener's prepared to accept it. Is the Assembly prepared to accept the new section? And online? Right, thank you. Another new section this time, Aniko Bradwell, and the clerk will read it.
A new section 5 in the name of Aniko, urge presbyteries to work collaboratively with congregations, the General Trustees and the Law Department so as to enable the strategic release of church buildings in accordance with the timeframe set out in the Presbytery Mission Plan, taking into account local sensitivities and including the possibility of community buyouts and a consequent delay in the sale processes. Urge the General Trustees in consultation with the Law Department to liaise with presbyteries in accommodating these timeframes without putting such congregations under undue time pressure, and encourage congregations not to close such buildings until such time as the sale has been effected.
Annie Cushitz-Bradwell, 67. Moderator, I minister in rural East Lothian with a lovely and lively congregation of all generations. Although we have a busy church life and are one of the 29%, we have had to make difficult decisions. The Presbytery Mission Plan told us to close 2 of our 4 churches, and we faced a challenging process. There has been a strong feeling in the local communities that they would like to try retaining these buildings for the use of the community. They have been the family church for many generations, and it's difficult for many to imagine that they will not be available in the same way anymore. We have community groups that are looking into the feasibility of a community buyout. That's not easy, and it takes time to determine what works would be necessary to make the buildings better usable for the community and how they may raise the funds to pay for them. We are very grateful to our presbytery for their support throughout this process. We made the decisions at the end of September last year to close the 2 buildings. We had been told that we would get the 6 to 9 month grace period for the local communities to examine the option of buyouts. So we were a little surprised when less than 2 months on, we were told that the buildings would be valued and put on the market. After all, it is us who will continue working in these communities, and taking this opportunity away from them could have strong negative implications for our congregation's ministry. Fortunately, this has now been resolved, and the communities are able to explore their options. We appreciate that the General Trustees and the Law Department are very busy with a large number of buildings due to be sold. The Assembly Trustee report on Monday stated that the Centre should support the local, and we are keen that there is a more strategic plan in place to help with the release of these many buildings. This new draft section proposes that once congregations have made a decision to close a building, their presbytery would determine with them how much time they would need. Do they want to go straight to market? Do they want to look into community buyouts? How much time do they need? Presbytery would then inform General Trustees and the Law Department, and we would urge them to work with the congregations to allow that time frame. This is not about dawdling or delaying, it's about allowing a sensible time frame. Moderator, I so move, and I have arranged for a seconder.
Seconded. Thank you. I've got a question. Fiona Lister.
Fiona Lister, 362. Thank you. I'm not sure I've put this in the right place or not, but I just wanted to ask under this, regarding the sale of buildings, can I just ask that the General Trustees can maybe admit that the trial of seeking planning permission in principle prior to the sale of a building has been flawed, and that in any future Kirk session will be advised of all the options and adequately supported.
Chair, that was a question. The Vice Chair.
Yep, thank you, Moderator. It's Scott Rennie, 462. Just to explain, the trustees, well, we're all under some pressure to try and get the best income we can. And there are occasionally situations where we wonder, rather than a building sale, if there's development potential. And the trustees quite rightly come under pressure to take that through or not to take that through. Obviously, I can't talk about a particular circumstance on the floor of the Assembly, but I will say that we do learn from pilots or trials, and if it gives the Commissioner any comfort, we will absolutely take cognizance of the remarks she's made and experience. So I hope that helps. Sorry, the new section particularly. Yes, we absolutely accept the new section. The new section actually sets out what we try to do, and we apologise if there are times when we don't manage. But what I can say is that the committee that I chair for the GTs, we look after this area, and we'll have at our next meeting, we'll look at the protocol and make sure that we're communicating well. Back to what I said earlier, moderator, it's really all about partnership, and we'll try and do better where we can.
Okay, now, General Trustees are prepared to accept it. I've got a comment, and Charles Finney, is your comment necessary, knowing that the Trustees are prepared to accept? Wherever Charles is.
Moderator, Finney 406. It's just a question in regards to the last kind of sentence of this new deliverance. And it is partly out of the fact that I am in the process of conversing with the General Trustees about the sale of a building currently. And that the advice is to continue to talk to them. And I know that's all been said, and that's fine. But actually, that in talking to them takes, how long does it take? And that was talked about earlier on by the convener, or a question that was asked about, can we have some clarity about how long it takes? That was mentioned earlier on. But I just want to ask, is the last statement in this proper? Is it correct? And encourage congregations not to close such buildings until such time as a sale has been effected. Because the reality is that a date is given by the General Trustees and PIMPIG that is included in the Presbytery Mission Plan for the closure of a building, and that the congregation then has to ask Presbytery to say, we want to close the building, and therefore the conversation that needs to start with the General Trustees to actually close the building. There is no time frame on it. And so I wonder about the last statement, whether or not that's entirely true or not.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Rennie 462. Just to say that the time is actually set by the Presbytery plan. And again, this is a matter of partnership and working together. If a building, say, is scheduled for the end of 2026, then we all need to plan so that we have a timeline and we start getting things moving way before that. And the reason it's so important that we continue using buildings until they close is for insurance purposes. Because again, if a building is not in use, that means the congregation who are in possession of that building will have to pay extra insurance. But again, if something happens to buildings that are unoccupied, it can affect everybody on the scheme. So that's why it's so important. So to avoid that problem, if a building is scheduled to close, say, at the end of 2026, really we need to start to get things in motion at a presbytery level, probably about 9 months to a year beforehand. And again, that's a matter of the presbytery and us and the law department all working together.
Right, thank you. So we've heard a new section. The General Trustees are prepared to accept and then put it to the Assembly. And online, thank you. Section 5, we've got a question by Abigail Morrison, and I have to switch out at this point with Martin Fair.
Morrison, number 79. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I very much welcome this move and this that's being proposed here in Section 5, and it will be a huge help to congregations. I have 2 quick questions, if I may. In section, I think it's 7.1.4.1 of your report, would that proposal also permit using funds for ongoing non-fabric costs? So it talks about using them for 5 marks of mission. Would that involve other routine costs? And under 7.1.4.2, it says that you might release capital from the Central Fabric Capital Fund, provided there's enough required for future capital costs. Are you able to give us any rule of thumb about that? I do understand that it will vary by different congregations, but for example, would 1 year's expenses be enough? More than 5? So any rule of thumb that could be given would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Regarding the first one, the simple answer is yes. those purposes are perfectly acceptable under, I quickly checked what 7.2 was. I think the first one was relating to revenue accounts, and revenue accounts are suitable for anything that can be covered by the 5 marks of mission, and all we will ask for is a note in advance of along with the request for drawdown to say we're going to be using it for XYZ. We won't be wanting any receipts, invoices, and all the rest of it, which is the current position regarding using it to pay for electricity, gas, and utilities. Regarding the second one, there is really no rule of thumb. It will be on a case-by-case basis, estimating, given the condition of the buildings, what is anticipated to be the likely cost over a number of years, and it may be based on how long it is since such and such a work was last done in the building, so therefore I can't state a particular number of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I've got nothing else before me for number 5, so I'm going to ask if the Assembly is happy to approve number 5. Assembly, and online. Thank you, Michael. We need to be really aware that we're under severe time pressure and there are weighty matters still before us, so we need to ask you to be disciplined in every sense, whether you need to speak and for how long you need to speak. And that would go for those asking and those answering. I think we all understand the necessity of that. Thank you. Number 6, we've got an amendment. Principal Clerk, would you read it, please?
Thank you very much. Moderator. Oh, there we are. This is in the name of Stella Campbell. It's an amendment to section 6 in the print, and she is asking that we add at the end and further amend Appendix 5 by adding at the end of paragraph 6, open brackets A, close brackets, the words, or for non-fabric purposes aligned with the 5 marks of mission.
Can I ask, Convener, if you are minded to be accepting this or otherwise? I'm going to ask Stella to speak to it if you're not.
Yes, we are happy with that.
Stella, are you happy to go with that?
Moderator, Stella Campbell, 345, more than happy to go with that.
Thank you, Stella. So is the Assembly happy to accept the amendment in the name of Stella Campbell? Thank you. And so numbers online. Yes, thank you. Thank you. So the amended number 6 is approved. Thank you. And online. Thank you. Number 7. I've nothing before me. Assembly's happy. Online. Approved. Thank you. Number 8. And online. Thank you. Number 9. There's a question in the name of Amy Bender. Amy.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you for the report. This is in reference to 3.3.2. As defined in the board's terms of reference, the General Trustees now have 4 types of volunteers: General Trustees, advisory members, committee members, and co-opted members. I'm just wondering how that sits with paying some members. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Convener?
As one of the 2 people who's been frankly asked to accept this, I don't really think it's for me to answer. I can tell you one thing, that the gentleman sitting beside me deserves it more than I do. I really don't think it's appropriate for a conflict of interest purpose for me to answer that question.
It is in order for a charity to agree to pay some or all of its trustees if there is a written agreement in place that the charity accepts that that is in the best interest of the charity. And I think that that is the case with the General Trustees, that both the Chair and the Vice Chair, it's almost a full-time job for each of them, and it is a very small amount of remuneration that they receive. So I have no hesitation in saying that it is in order and lawful for that payment to be made.
Thank you, Solicitor. Yeah. So section 9 again. Thank you. And online? Thank you. So that finishes the main part of the report. The deliverance as a whole. Oh, supplementary, sorry. So supplementary report of the trustees. Yep. So section 1 is receive the supplementary report. Thank you. And online. Section 2. And online. And that's it. Yep. And the deliverance as a whole. Thank you. And online. Okay. Dismissed. Yep. Thank you, trustees, for all your work. Not just today, but as you go through the year. Thank you.